Hey, it's Base from Base Official and welcome to today's episode. Today we are talking about the core. What is the core? That's the title of the video. You've seen it, you clicked on it. So what is the core? Well, I googled it to try and find out what Google said, and what Google said is anatomical core, a definition and functional classification on sciencedirect.com. The core is in essence exactly that. The central portion of the body and is comprised of the torso, pelvic and shoulder girdles and their musculature, connective tissues and osseous structures. Osseous structures being bone structures, so bones and joints and skeletons and stuff like that. I want to warn you by saying that I can't fit everything I want to say in one video, so this is just the intro. I originally planned on trying to do it all on the board, so I was going through it and I thought there's no way I can get this all up on the board all in one video, so I'm going to probably follow up with another one, maybe another two. We'll see how it goes. So I've kind of laid it out in the way that I think is important to know about the core. First thing to know about the core is that it is separated by two functioning groups. You have your inner unit and your outer unit. Now, turn up on the board, inner unit versus outer unit. Now, they kind of use as terms to encapsulate muscles that work in synergy and like functional groups with each other. So on the inner unit, we have the Tva, the Transversus Abdominis. Now this is a muscle that I've been talking about, and I'm a huge believer in training for everybody. Check out my other videos if you haven't seen me rant about that, but TVA, super important. It's a major stabilizer of the kind of lower spine, the lumbar spine, and it's responsible for increasing intra-abdominal pressure, which again is really important in stabilizing the spine and the trunk. We have the posterior fibers of the internal obliques. Both of them are stimulated at the same time. They kind of bend the trunk forward, and when one side is stimulated in flexion, it flexes the spine sideways like that, but in rotation it's called an ipsilateral contraction. So if you imagine you're throwing a ball and you rotate to the left hand side internal oblique will be firing. So if you turn to the right internal oblique is firing. Then you have your diaphragm, which is basically a main muscle in breathing, your pelvic floor muscles and your multifidus. Now these are postural stabilization kind of system is the inner unit, and it segmentally stabilizes the spine and it stabilizes the sacroiliac joint, which is basically the joint between your sacrum, so like the bottom of your spine, and your iliac, which is basically your pelvis. Okay? So that's kind of what the inner unit does, and it's extremely important. Equally as important is the outer unit, which consists of these muscles, your Rectus Abdominis, so like your six-pack muscle, the muscle that you see on bodybuilders when they're absolutely ripped, the muscle that everybody wants and tries very hard to get is your Rectus Abdominis. Its main kind of functions is it flexes the trunk when the pelvis is an anchor. So imagine a sit-up or a crunch, your pelvis isn't moving, it's fixed, but your trunk flexes. That's your Rectus Abdominis. If the trunk is fixed, imagine hanging from a bar, then it lifts and posteriorly rotates the pelvis. Now you have, I guess, the rest of your obliques, so your anterior fibers of your obliques, of your internal obliques and your external obliques. Your external obliques, if they fire both at the same time, they bend the trunk forward again, same as the internal obliques. If it's stimulated unilaterally, so on one side, it's also responsible for same side lateral flexion, but it's responsible for contralateral rotation. So if you throw with your right hand and you turn to the left hand side, it's your right external obliques working. When you turn to the right, that's your left external obliques working. So your external and your internal obliques work in synergy. When when you rotate your trunk to the left hand side, your left internal obliques and your right external obliques are working in synergy to cause the rotation movement. Then you have your Erector Spinae group, which is a group of 3 different muscles that run kind of laterally down your spine. They all kind of are responsible for the same sort of movements. Extension of the spine when kind of activated both at the same time, or when one side is activated it causes lateral flexion of the spine. Your latissimus dorsi, which affects your shoulder joint and it causes adduction, internal rotation and extension of the shoulder joint. Your gluteus muscles, so your bum muscles, your QL, your quadratus lumborum, your adductors and your hamstrings. Now you can think of the outer unit as being the main system for generating movement. It's also a very important stabilization mechanism when you're under load. So there's a critical point where your inner unit is no longer able to handle the load. So then your rectus abdominis, your external and internal obliques and all the rest of the muscles act as stabilizers under load. So I hope that is helpful as an introduction to the core, the inner unit and the outer unit. The fact that the inner unit is responsible for kind of postural stabilization, segmental stabilization of the spine and your sacroiliac joint, and your outer unit, which is responsible for the movement that your body creates, and also responsible for stabilization under load, and the fact that there are different muscles in each and they both work in synergy. Now the outer unit has multiple different systems, like the anterior oblique system, posterior oblique system, lateral and long, deep longitudinal system. We can get into those in another video, but that's how the muscles all work in kind of synchronicity and sling systems and all of this really kind of interesting stuff, important stuff that you need to incorporate into your training. I do have one comment, although this is a what is the core, I have a comment. The inner unit is neglected compared to the outer unit. I'll explain that in the next video. Thanks for watching. I hope you understand the core now.